Hey guys, I hope you're doing well, and today I'd like to talk about tooltips in Diablo 4 and how they are lying to you. So many of these tooltips in the game are actually misleading many players, especially new players, because they are just wrong. Yes, they are lying to you, and you might make some mistakes based on assumptions you made seeing these tooltips. So especially if you're a new player and just coming to the game and starting with Season 4, you might be a little bit overwhelmed by all of these numbers and values and tooltips. So I just want to demystify some of these misleading fake news that you might encounter during your Diablo 4 journey. So I'd like to start with the number one misleading tooltip, which is actually attack power. So this is what I read from time to time in my comment section under my guide videos. So also with my latest Heartseeker guide, some people wrote me or asked me, well, I don't do as high damage as you do, so I just can't clear pits 100 in 3 minutes or so, and I just don't understand why. I have even higher attack power than you, and they sometimes show me their attack power values, or they have 3 times more attack power, and they're just wondering why is their damage so low compared to my guides, for example. And well, attack power is a tooltip you should never pay attention to, actually. Maybe in the first 1 to 3 world tiers, if you're leveling a new character, you can compare this value with your friends sometimes, but in the end game you should never pay attention to this value. So as far as I know, many things are not included into this tooltip here. So in the tooltip it says it's an evaluation of damage you deal, so it tries to simulate kind of attack power, which should also showcase your real damage numbers. But it's very difficult to achieve in such a game as a Diablo 4, because the actual damage formula is quite complicated actually. But what it tries to do, it tries to evaluate the damage, but many things are missing. So as far as I know, there's no critical strike chance or critical strike damage involved in this formula here, which can be very crucial to many builds which rely on critical strike damage. Then also something like our passives. So I'm playing the Heartseeker rogue right now, and we have Victimize as our core key passive. And actually most of the damage I deal comes from this passive here. So, and this is nothing that is inside your attack power. So attack power does not care about the passive you play. It doesn't know that I'm playing with Victimize, that I'm dealing 100 millions of damage with my Victimize explosions. It's just nothing inside here. So just to be sure, I would recommend you to never pay attention to this value here and never compare your damage with other people by looking at this value. It's just lying to you and it's nothing helpful. I'm still wondering why it's in the game 1 year after the release of Diablo 4. Okay, so please forget about attack power and don't ask me in the comments about attack power. Thank you. Okay, so this is the number one misleading tooltip, and talking about damage calculation in Diablo 4, we can also take a look at critical strike damage. So here it says I have 102% critical strike damage, which is a little bit weird because I actually don't have any critical strike damage on my gear. So I don't have any affixes that rolled critical strike damage. But how is it possible then? So I can take off my swords here, and you will see now it dropped to 50%. So 50% is actually the base value of critical strike damage. So every new character, level 1 character, will have 50% as an inherent damage multiplier. So here the swords, I don't have critical strike damage rolled on them, but swords have critical strike damage as a base roll. So you can see in the top corner below attacks per second, you have the 17.5% critical strike damage. So this is the reason why my value here is increasing a bit, but does it make sense that it goes that high? Because I have 17.5%. So 2 times 17.5% is 35%. So if we add these numbers together, 50 plus 35, we should have 85. But instead it's showing me 102%. And this is a little bit weird, but I can explain you the reason for that. So you can see in the tooltip it says includes the inherent X 50%. And in order to understand this, we quickly need to take a look at damage calculation in general and how it works in Diablo 4. So a little reminder for everyone. in Diablo 4, we can express damage calculation in this different damage buckets. So the damage buckets are like, yeah, the way how most people try to explain how damage calculation works. So we have 4 damage buckets, let's say. One is your weapon, and here it's only depending on your item level. So I have my bow, for example, which is item power 925, so this is the highest item power possible. So this one is guaranteeing me the highest amount of damage from my weapon. So this is the first bucket. The second one is your primary stat, which is dexterity in the case of rogue. So here I have 1800 dexterity. And then we have multiplicative damage and we have additive damage. And multiplicative damage is basically all damage numbers that are indicating this X. So here, for example, we also have in the tooltip, if we look at critical strike damage again, we have this inherent X50. So this X means it's multiplied, and this is basically the most powerful damage multiplier in the game. So each damage bonus number, which has an X, is damage multiplier, and this is the best, the best damage bonus you can get in the game. So you can have different, many of those, so from your aspects, from your skills, from your paragon nodes, from your, whatever, I don't know, items, basically everything. So, yeah, these all go into this multiplicative damage bucket. And as the name says, they are multiplied by each other. So we multiply 50% by 20% by 30, and this is leading in the end into a very large multiplier, like a big multiplier number. So this is the biggest, the greatest bonus for damage in the end of the game. And then we have additive damage, which is actually a very big bucket in the end, just because we can stack easily tons of additive damage. And here, instead of multiplying damage, we are adding damage. So here we would have the same, for example, and instead of multiplying, we just add them up together, and we have a sum in the end, and this is also a huge bucket, which with a huge multiplier in the end. So this is how damage calculation basically works in Diablo. You have these different buckets, and you multiply all of these buckets. You multiply your weapon damage, actually you also have your skill damage, so also skill percentage damage, so it's relative in percent. So you multiply your weapon with your skill damage, with your dexterity value kinda, and also with your multiplying damage values together, so with yeah, all your multiplicative damage numbers, and with your additive damage multiplier. So in the end, you have your damage calculated this way. So why did I show you this? This is important in order to understand why this value here is a little bit weird. So what it actually does is, it also multiplies, and this is a bug, it multiplies this 17.5% critical strike damage by this 50% base number here. So 17.5 multiplied by 50%, and then it adds this new number here. So actually, in your critical strike damage, you always have more, like a higher value than it should show you. So this is a bug. Here, Tooltip is again lying to you, and it yeah, implies that you deal more damage than you are actually dealing. So just that you keep this in mind. And the important part here is, you don't need to stack any further critical strike damage because it's additive damage. And this 50% that you have in the beginning of the game is already enough in order to boost your damage in a high, like in a very effective way by critical strike damage. Just because it also goes into this multiplicative damage bucket. So here this 50% from critical strike, it's in the beginning of the game, so your character has it in the beginning. So yeah. This is the important number from critical strike damage, and everything else is additive. So yeah, hope it's not too complicated. And the same is for vulnerable damage. So here you also have a value which is much higher than it should be. So and here again you can see you have this 20% inherent multiplicative damage. So if you make enemies vulnerable, you deal 20% more multiplicative damage to them. Meaning your damage, if you would deal 100 damage, you will deal 120 if enemies are vulnerable. So this is what multiplicative damage does. It just multiplies your total damage by the value. And everything else after this 20% is also additive, so the same like critical strike damage. And so this would mean if I would take off all my gear, all my skills, my Paragon board, if I would reset everything, I would have only 20% vulnerable. And what it does here, it also multiplies each of your vulnerable damage affixes. So I have quite a lot of them on my gloves, on my weapons, on my rings. It multiplies all of your vulnerable damage values by 20. And so this value is also kind of lying to you. So it's always higher than it actually should be. And yeah, you can see the real vulnerable damage in the bottom of the tooltip. So here you can see I actually have 1262 instead of this 1535. So this is just another wrong tooltip that should be removed half a year ago, and I still don't know why they did not do it. But yeah, it is how it is. And talking about vulnerable damage, I also mentioned I'm playing Heartseeker Rogue, and most of our damage with Heartseekers is coming from Victimize, so the key passive of the Rogue class here. And here we also have a huge mess, a huge tooltip mess going on here. So first of all, we have again our current damage increase. So here it implies that I have 1842% damage increase, but this value is also relying to this vulnerable damage here, which is wrong. So I just told you that this number is also wrong. It's lying to you. It's way higher than it actually should be. But it's this tooltip here in Victimize is also relying on the vulnerable damage tooltip. So we have a huge mess here. And also the damage that you can see in the top line, so 447% of the original damage is dealt to surrounding enemies. And this is actually also wrong, because some guys like Ava and some other guys from Extrol have figured out how this damage formula works for Victimize. And it's also a little bit more complicated. But also the damage formula for Victimize is different than what it's shown in the tooltip. So we are not dealing 447% more, which would be multiplicative factor of 4.4 or 4.5, but instead it's also double dipping, and there are some bugs going on right now in Season 4, but the damage multiplier by Victimize should be around 20 or even 25 in the end game if you have really good gear. So again, here we are dealing way more damage than the tooltip is implying or telling us. And here another thing, we have lucky hit chance, and it says dealing direct damage to vulnerable enemies has up to 50% chance to cause an explosion. This is something I already mentioned in my lucky hit chance guide, so you can check it out on my channel if you like. I also can make a link in the description. So I made this lucky hit chance deep dive guide, and there I also showed you that this tooltip here is lying to you. Instead of up to 50% chance, it should just write exactly 50% chance, because how lucky hit chance works is you have your initial lucky hit chance from your skill you're using, for example Heartseeker, 74%, and then you multiply the 74% with the 50% from Victimize, and then you have a chance to hit this lucky hit effect. So instead of up to 50% chance, which is very confusing to many new players, it should just write 50%. It's always 50%, it's not up to 50%. But yeah, for more details, check out my lucky hit chance guide. I will link it in the description if you have further questions there. But also this tooltip here is actually completely wrong and doesn't tell us anything about our damage. So yeah, you can see a trend here that Diablo 4 is not very good at delivering tooltips. And while we are still talking about damage and how real damage calculation works, another thing that might confuse some players is the skill damage. So you can see here, if I take off my Shaco, I have 48% damage from Victimize. So this is this gray number in the brackets, in the gray brackets. So 48% without Shaco, and if I would put on my Shaco, I would have 58%. And now you might think, well, it's not a big difference, so it just gives me 10% more damage. But this is actually not true. This is not a tooltip, this is not the wrong tooltip or something, but I just wanted to mention it as well, just so you know how valuable ranks to skills are, even with such tiny differences. So we are talking about 10% here, from 48 to 58. And I can also illustrate this in Paint very quickly. So the Shaco, in fact, doesn't give you 10% more damage. So we go from 48%, we go to 58%, and you would assume, okay, this is a difference of 10% damage. But actually it works a little bit differently. So what you can do is you can divide 58 by 48. So I can quickly do this in my calculator. 58 by 48. And you subtract 1. And what this gives you is actually 20%. So you have your relative damage increase from 58 to 48 is 20%. And this is the value which will increase your total damage. So if you wear a Shaco, or if you get +4 ranks to your Heartseeker somewhere, also from your pants for example, you will not only deal 10% more, but actually double, 20% more. And this always depends on the amount of ranks. So if I would take off my pants, which gives me 6 ranks to Heartseeker, this can be a little bit less or a little bit more than 20%. But yeah, I just calculated it for my values here. So rank 15, and this is exactly 20%. So yeah, just something you also need to know maybe, in order to understand how valuable ranks to skills are. And now let's continue with another important offensive stat, which is attack speed. So I also have covered this already in my Heartseeker guide, but I can also mention it in this video here. So attack speed is not working as you might think. So we have hidden attack speed caps. So there are some attack speed values that go into cap 1, and there are some attack speed values that go into cap 2. And I can illustrate this the most easy way by showing you this graphic here. So here again, credits for Ava, very nice guy who's testing a lot of rogue stuff. And here you can see for the rogue class we have 2 different caps of attack speed. And in this sheet here you can see which source of attack speed goes into which cap. So for example, the rapid aspect, which I also have in my gear right now, is going into cap 2. And also the Heartseeker attack speed bonus is also going into cap 2. While most of the stuff we have from our gear itself and skills and Paragon is in the cap 1. And this already influences how your attack speed is kind of summed up together. And then we also have attack speed frames. So if we add 10% attack speed, it doesn't mean that we attack 10% faster, but instead it means we have a chance of reaching a threshold value. And if we reach this threshold, then we will decrease our frames per second, which in the end will increase our casting animation. So the less frames per second we have, the faster is our casting animation. And this is what actually physically increases our attack speed. So it's a little bit tricky here, and then to be sure you need to calculate this every time, basically, and understand which frame is possible with your build. So you will determine the exact amount of your attacks per second. So with 13 frames, for example, you have around 4.6 Heartseeker attacks per second. So yeah, that's a very nice sheet to have. So again, credits to Ava, thank you very much for your work. And I can also link down this in the description. So here again with the attack speed bonus, it's not as simple as it's shown in the tooltip here. If you really want to go deep into it, you have to work with such sheets and calculate your breakpoints and attack speed caps. So yeah, a little bit annoying, but it is how it is. And the last thing I want to mention, this is not a tooltip bug or something, or lying tooltip, but many people forget the Caltrops are also traps. So this is also a comment I hear very often. I'm not playing with Poison Trap, I'm not playing with Death Trap. So how in the world why I'm playing with Deadly Ambush or the Ambush Glyph? So Ambush and Deadly Ambush are increasing my damage by trapped enemies. So yeah, guys, don't forget, Caltrops is also a trap skill. You can see it in the corner. So it's agility, mobility and trap. So just a little reminder here. Yeah, Caltrops are trap skills. Okay guys, I think that's just enough for the video. I'm also running out of ideas for bugged lying tooltips. Let me know in the comments if you have some more tooltips in mind which are lying to you. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little video. I see you in the next one. Have a nice day guys, and bye bye.